Um, that's pretty cringeworthy.
It
But that,
was laughable. It made me uncomfortable, and I told him, and I was like, I'm done. Bye. Thanks. So yeah.
um, but yeah, I can certainly see, since whenever I'm at a gaming table, whenever I'm the only woman, I will get comments occasionally that are problematic. Um, do you, uh, actually, let me change tack there. Um, because it sounds like you're all saying that there seems to be, it's obviously normally not outright, except for maybe really terrible accents. And so you're talking about a more subtle form of racism that comes up at the table. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as sort of the Archer racism, if you're familiar with that show, where there's usually one or two characters who will make really horrifically offensive racial joke, and it feels like producers having their cake and eating too, like ha ha ha, look how horrible these racists are, but guess what? We're still laughing at a racist joke, and it's it's kind of has that sort of vibe where the players will make racially tinged jokes in a way that's supposed to come across as ironic and self-effacing, but then it's still a racial joke.
Yeah, yeah. I can see how that would be super uncomfortable.
I've also experienced the just there is no race here. So if I'm imagining that my character is
Oh,
a person of color, um,
Your hint
and
text was
then
really clear. You just like
oh,
wiped it away. It was like
right, yeah, it's
it's
like
gone.
oh, but I in my head my character is maybe looks more like me than not, and then someone may make the assumption that my character is white. Um, so I think I've noticed more of the erasure than and that's kind of hard to I don't I think in other people's minds their characters may look a lot like them, and so by default other people's characters look like them, like in that same way that we look at pictures of Jesus and European imagery of Jesus is blonde hair and blue eyes and nice silky long hair. um, so I think of that almost as like the Jesus syndrome of role playing. That if your character is a person of color and you don't have any other indicators other than just you're being you, and you are saying you're not using a funny accent, you're not saying that they're dressed in a particular way, they're just like some person who just happens to be a person of color, then everybody's still going to assume that, well, there are no people of color who are anything other than caricatures or um, have very, very distinct ethnic qualifiers, I guess. And otherwise, everybody's white.
Yeah. So I mean that's kind of what came up for me while you were talking. Like, do you find yourself uh, describing your character's race in a way that the white players you're with do not?
Sometimes.
That's fair.
Yeah. and
yeah.
and
Sarah,
sometimes
could
not.
you, sorry, Sarah, could you just repeat that question once more?
I was asking if our panelists found that they described their character's race in a way that white players may not like even mention it because it's just assumed.
Um, if I yeah, or if it's okay if I do. I think maybe I'm very slightly more likely to go ahead and offer it as a detail in a very brief, awkward way. But when I'm playing with a group where I don't especially know them, I'm also paying attention to like what are the microcultural like what's the ways that this group of people does it? Like what's okay? The archer like sort of the archer thing. So is this group are these people I'm worried about? Or are these well-meaning people who like make archerish like jokes that I don't love but see where they're from, or do they have different standards? So I something I quickly try to feel out where people are at. So if I throw out like, oh, I'm an elf who, if I guess would be cast with Asian features or something, are people going to freak? Or they're like, oh yeah, I'll do that. I've been at tables where everyone else just offered like, oh, here's the racial identity stuff to help visualize, and everyone was like explicitly being like, yeah, that's a feature of humans, and that was comfortable. But I sometimes just follow the lead of, or just see where the group's culture is at if it's a new group of people.
I find that character names are sometimes a point of contention. If I bring a character who's not white to the table, okay, sometimes people just ignore it, and maybe that's better than the alternative. If I bring a character who's not white, who has a hard-to-pronounce name, that's going to start problems, because everyone's going to start mispronouncing it, and then they're going to start mispronouncing it on purpose.
Yeah, I think especially in gaming, which tends to be very sort of Eurocentric, if it's, say, a published setting and there's not some sort of explicit analog to non-European continents and countries, there's definitely pushback. Like, people like that don't exist in this world. I'm like, is that wishful thinking on your part, or?
Ooh, that's an excellent comeback to that kind of reaction.
I mean, it's just that we're all sitting around already playing in the fictional world. What does it say? Why is it straining credibility to include individuals who, fall outside preaching to the choir on this panel?
Yes.
I find pictures helpful. So in the past few games I've played, after the first or second session, the players have found pictures, because the internet has lots of pictures, of people who, like, if this were a movie, this is who my character would be played by, and that often becomes a very easy way to just say, yes, my character was a person of color, without having to go into all the detail. Like, this is who it is. You know this person, and this person is familiar to you. And that isn't always possible, but I found that's been kind of helpful.
Yeah, I'm curious. It sounds like we've all had experiences with sort of subtle or implicit racism, but has anyone had experiences where there was someone who clearly was incredibly problematic and explicit about it, or is the kind of culture that we've all been exposed to just one where, because everyone's absorbed lots of problematic entertainment, that just kind of seeps in by osmosis to the way they game too?
I think that maybe the closest is to something more explicit. If someone is showing values, there are ones that kind of feel strange when they mirror real world ones. So I'll say, like, most of the D&D games I play, people have humanized, like, all species, and it's really weird because it's like, well, is it an analog or is it not? It's unclear. But yeah, most groups I've played with don't do weird, heinous stuff, but I know that some groups do. So once in a while, you trip over, like, the tendency in the fiction to just dehumanize people, and it's not targeted at me, but it's assumption. I actually remember playing some 4th edition RPGA, and I had a half-orc guy who was, like, my favorite character ever, and most tables were like, all right, great, you have multiple swords, fantastic. And sometimes people were like, oh, wait a minute, like, how can you be in an adventure with us? And what values were implicit? And it was never, it still has mostly been good, but I'd say the biggest case has been those cases where, like, the values they have, the values represented in the story are ones that feel strange.
Playing with strangers on the internet has been a great place for me to see outright heinous racism. I don't do this very much anymore, but back when I played on, like, the White Wolf unmoderated chats, a good 1 in 3 characters would be a terrifying racial caricature, usually of an Asian character. There were a lot of strange ninjas and samurai and white people who had ended up as samurai somehow. And I always played a black character on that particular thing, and occasionally people would just outright complain about black people.
Wow.
Yep.
I think I've really been blessed. I have not really seen outright racism at the table. Although several years ago, when Steal Away Jordan came out, where you play a black person who's a slave, somebody really wanted to, and I can't remember if this was in a forum or how this came about, because
It
when
was
I was,
Chauncey De Vega on We Are Respectable Negroes.
oh yeah, there was that one. Yeah, well, he didn't
Yeah.
like the game. But whenever I play the game, I would play the game at a con. One of the first things I would say is that I don't care what life was actually like. We don't use the N-word at my table. If I'm running this game for you, we don't use the N-word. And I can't remember if this was in person or on a forum that somebody really wanted to make the point that it absolutely had to be in there, that anytime you play this game, you had to have the freedom to use the N-word. And I was like, are you serious?
What?
And at some point I just said, well, just don't let me be at your table, because my rule is that you don't use it. And for that particular case, to me, it's just something that I don't say. I don't like it, and I know that there are plenty of African Americans who totally embrace it and would be okay with it. And so for me, it's really a personal thing. Like, this is my game, and I'm running this game, or I'm playing this game, and I'm just putting it up front. You may have where your line is, mine is that this is not language that we use.
Right. You establish your boundaries. Like, people should respect that. I know, like, as badly as I want to play Steal Away Jordan, I know I wouldn't be comfortable using that language in the game. So, although I understand it's a different context for me, but I'm kind of, it always bugs me when I hear of people arguing with the creators over something like that.
Yeah.
It's like,
You can take it where you want. Just know that wasn't the intention.
Totally. I think that does provide us a good time to segue into what games have you played that have done a good job of portraying characters of color, if any? I'm hoping there's some. And feel free to talk about your own projects. So we do have Steal Away Jordan.
Yeah, I guess it portrays black people okay. I think, and with that, I will add that a lot of times it depends on the players, and having a game that either that doesn't erase having some diversity in it, doesn't just disregard that, is helpful. I'm not always certain that having it be very explicit that you're playing people of color, except for my game, I guess. But is always helpful. But yes, if it's a theme, that's great, and if it's a theme that was done with love and with good information and without trying to make caricatures, then yes. Right now I'm playing Urban Shadows, and at first I was a little like, you just basically put your ethnicity and as your look, and that at first gave me this feeling like, as somebody who looks kind of ethnically ambiguous, it was hard for me to pick, and I think of, I get mistaken for all kinds of ethnicities. But as we've been playing it, it's actually been quite enjoyable to be specifically a person from a particular place who has a specific ethnicity, even if that is somewhat ambiguous or even and mixed. So I would say that yes, and I was skeptical at first, but I'm enjoying it.
Excellent. All right. How about you, Andre?
My own gaming tends to a lot more mainstream